My name is Petya Rasheva, a student in the Building Power to Lead class of Professor Jeffrey Pfeffer at the Stanford LEAD program. I am talking today to Ceri Evans, the Commercial Director of Bechtel for UK and Ireland, Europe, Africa, and Middle East. Welcome, Ceri.
Thank you, Petya. Lovely to be here.
Ceri, your career path is very interesting. Can you please give us a very brief overview?
Yes. So I guess I'm unusual when it comes to people in our industry, in the construction and engineering industry. So I started my career in the music industry as a music graduate, and spent approximately 8 years in the music industry as a PA. Subsequently, I was made redundant from a role at Classic FM and ended up being given an opportunity to apply for a job at the Institution of Civil Engineers. And many people say to me, how did you end up moving from the music industry into the engineering industry? And honestly, I was blown away by everything to do with construction and engineering and found it quite fascinating. So at the end of 3.5 years there, I looked for another role and was given an opportunity to apply for a job to be personal assistant to one of the partners at Bechtel. Hand on heart, at that time, I didn't know very much about Bechtel and what they did. But I met with Tom McCarthy, who was Senior Vice President for the rail division. He was an incredible human and an incredible leader. And I'll never forget during my interview, his main question was, "What are you afraid of?" And I think my answer to him was, "I'm afraid of dying." And he said, "Well, everyone's afraid of dying, Ceri. Is there anything else?" And I said, "You know what? I don't think so." So even by the time I'd gotten home, the job offer was there to come and work for Tom. So I initially looked after him for a period of a year or a year and a half as his PA, at which time I'd obviously started to learn more about the industry. I spent a lot of time with him traveling, going on business workshops with him, with all of his senior leadership team, and it was quite fascinating. At the end of that period, we had a career discussion, and he essentially gave me a shot at moving what we call in Bechtel function. So he said, "What would you like to do? What would you like to do?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. What can I do?" And I sat down with the Bechtel HR lead, and she talked me through all the various pathways that there were in Bechtel, and they were laid out in front of me. Which one do you want? So after talking to another great SVP at Bechtel, a gentleman called Dick McElhatton, who was a massive supporter of me, he said, "Ceri, I think you should go down a contracts path." So I did. So between Tom McCarthy and Dick McElhatton, they gave me a shot at managing a £9.8 billion baseline for the West Coast route modernisation, which was one of the largest rail jobs in Europe at the time. And I guess it was a sink or swim moment. And I seemed to do quite well at it. So fast forward 3 years from being a PA, I was managing my own subcontracts on Rugby station area redevelopment. They were the civils packages. The client seemed to like what I was doing and subsequently asked, "Can she come and work on Reading station area redevelopment?" Within 3 months of starting that job, the client promoted me into the senior commercial management role, and I was given my own 200 million package to run. This was for Reading Train Care Depot, which was a massive train care depot and part of the critical path of the Reading station area redevelopment job, which was circa £1 billion. I delivered that job 7 months early and 33 million under budget. And we also received multiple nominations for British Construction Industry Awards, including the Prime Minister's Award. We won the award for health and safety, and we were also awarded certification for collaboration. After that, I moved back into prime contracts for Bechtel, and I was running 2.4 billion baseline for Crossrail on the west side on Network Rail Works, and then subsequently interviewed for a role against many more experienced on paper people for the Crossrail West station. So essentially that was 14 stations on the west of Crossrail, and of course Crossrail 13.6 billion pounds at its inception. After doing that, I was approached externally by a headhunter for a role at a company called Lang O'Rourke, which is the largest privately owned construction company in the UK. That role was to be executive assistant to their commercial director globally, a gentleman called Callum Tuckett. And again, he was a huge supporter and advocate. And even before we'd finished the conversation, he said to me, I don't want this to go cold. You know, he wanted to make it happen. So I subsequently left Bechtel and joined Lang O'Rourke, where I had this huge global opportunity to support an amazing, charismatic leader. For a year, I helped him to pull together the various commercial leads and disciplines before I was again promoted into a role working for the CFO and reporting into the board there as their global head of governance and assurance. I did that role for a year, at which time I was headhunted again to a company called Jacobs Engineering. That role was a commercial director role for buildings and infrastructure against Europe, Africa, and Middle East. And during that role, I traveled the globe, doing deep dives, audits into some of Jacobs' largest jobs. And again, at the end of 2.5 years, I was headhunted to a company called Atkins to a board level position as commercial director for Atkins globally. Shortly after that, I became pregnant at 45 years of age. I was very, very unwell, so couldn't fly around the globe any longer, so took some time out. And then when I was feeling better, set up my own consulting company and was pulled back into Network Rail, where I consulted on the devolution of Network Rail as an infrastructure projects provider to what they now call capital projects. And then who should come calling again but Bechtel? And just at that point when I was considering coming back to work, but I wanted a little bit of balance because I had a just turned 1-year-old at the time. Bechtel offered me an opportunity to come back as the head of business development for UK and Ireland Rail, which was another huge opportunity. After doing that for a year at Bechtel, I moved on to one of our projects, City Fibre, to gain another sector, I guess. I'd already worked in rail for 11 years, buildings, water, nuclear, and fibre was a sector that I hadn't experienced previously. So spent a year in our client's organisation helping from a PMO perspective create alignment through the various job disciplines and making sure that we delivered an end product that was a sellable commodity essentially. At the end of that, an opportunity came up to become the contracts and procurements manager for the UK, Ireland, Europe, Africa, and Middle East region. From a personal perspective, I think from the moment I'd moved into contracts in Bechtel, that had been almost the holy grail for me as a career point. Being able to say I was leading that and I was successful in gaining that role. So I'm currently leading contracts and procurement across that region for the infrastructure sector. Infrastructure is public infrastructure, heavy civils, and then renewables. Anything that falls in that bracket from rail, aviation, I deal with people, projects, process, and prospects. So that's my journey to date. That's where I am working in Bechtel. It's been an amazing journey. I think I've been given many opportunities by many amazing people, and also there's been a real learning curve from being a PA on how to lead, how to kind of really focus on where I want to be next, and how to proactively and consciously make those decisions about what's best and what that path should be. And that's where I am today.
Really very impressive. Thank you for
Thank
sharing.
you.
You have come to be responsible for roughly 30% of the globe.
Yes. Yes.
It's really impressive. And looking back, Ceri, we see that you've worked really hard. But what else has been critical in your path to power?
I think there are a few key things that have been really critical. For me, one would be, I guess, sponsorship or mentorship, depending on what you call it. So without question, I would say that moment when I started working for Tom McCarthy and he recognized something in me that at that point maybe I didn't even see in myself. He gave me an opportunity, and that was a pivot point, because it wasn't a comfortable opportunity. It wasn't an easy opportunity. So I think it's very important that you are willing to take those opportunities. So I think the phrase is, I think we've talked about it, get out of your own way. It's very easy to have self-doubt and think, well, I can't do that. Well, what's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is that you don't achieve what you set out to achieve. The best thing that can happen is that you learn a phenomenal amount and it propels you forward. And he had absolute faith in me as a leader, and he gave me the space and the tools to be able to do that. So he sponsored me through a civil engineering and contract management law course. He likewise sponsored me through a master's in quantity surveying. So within a very short period, within 3 years of being a PA, I had completed a master's in quantity surveying and also chartered as a member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. I think secondly, from a mindset perspective, I did a lot of work personally into what might be my blockers and what might be my motivators. Leadership isn't simply about working hard. So my favorite analogy is you can dig a hole under the wrong tree for a very long time, but there's not necessarily a pot of gold there. So it's very, very important that you understand what your leader is aiming towards, what your company is aiming towards. And if you can align yourself to those goals and help that business achieve those goals, while also taking away your own personal blockers. So we all have them, be it I'm not likable, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, I'm not clever, I'm not funny, I'm not kind. And we kind of manifest these things from a very young age, from a very early age. And I think I, at one point, had a fear of failing. I was that classic, A grade student, to the point where not getting an A grade for me was failing. And while at Bechtel, I did a course that was called Personal Effectiveness, and it was about how do we realign that? How do we challenge what our blockers are? How do we get out of our own way? And also, how do you visualize where you want to be? Because I think many people just look at what they're doing right now and they say, well, I'm working so hard right now. Why isn't anyone recognizing it? Rather than looking up and going, well, what's next? And how do I show I'm ready for the next thing? And part of that course was learning that if I wanted some kind of career, then I needed to be able to visualize it. I needed to be able to visualize the life that I wanted alongside that career. So I almost kind of propelled myself 80 years into the future and looked back. What would I like to see? I'd like to see travel. I'd like to see a beautiful home. I'd like to see a fulfilling career that can enable those things and take me all over the world. And what blockers do I need to remove to be able to do that? Well, I need to be able to get over this fear of failure and embrace it and take that step forward. And I also need to find a way to visualize that in a career type way, so that I know step 1 is I get my master's, step 2, I become chartered, step 3, I take on a stretch assignment, step 4, I make sure I have a mentor, someone I admire, who I can follow their path and learn from. Does that answer the question?
Yes. Yes, it's just fascinating listening to you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Ceri, and in your experience, once you achieve a position of seniority, how do you retain it?
I think that's a really interesting question, because and I think that there's one moment I can describe in my career where I felt the shift into leadership. So that moment when I was promoted in Network Rail, I remember prior to that moment, I was working for someone else. So they were ultimately accountable, responsible for everything I achieved. So if I didn't achieve, they would be accountable, responsible for whether I didn't achieve. If I did achieve, generally I would get the accolades and the kudos rather than them. It's quite a nice place to sit. When you move into leadership roles, you are accountable, responsible for everything that you do. And I remember that moment very, very clearly. So you live or die by the decisions you make. You live or die by how you deal with your team and deal with the people around you. So I think one of the most important things to do to hold on to those leadership positions is to align yourself to the business you're working for, align yourself to your client, align yourself to your team. So as a leader, you very much have to lead and not manage. I learned that being a good leader was about understanding individuals. So in Reading, as an example, I had a very diverse team from different places in the world with different motivators, with their own blockers. And I think you have to have an element of EQ in leadership positions to understand, to get the most out of your people, enables you to be more successful, which enables you to align to the business needs. And in order to do that, you have to tailor how you lead, because someone in your team might be very detail specific or very focused. So when it comes to those people, you have to be specific about goals, give clear direction, ensure they're competent, give them opportunities to thrive and always motivate them. Other individuals in the team might thrive from being trusted and empowered. So you have more of a helicopter view of what they're doing, and you allow them to check back and you support their confidence as they grow. And in doing so, you end up with a team who fully trusts you, which means you can deliver to your own line managers, to your own business. And then in turn, you gain and retain that trust. And I think another lesson I learned from Tom McCarthy is a deadline is a promise. So when we make promises to our boss, to our client, to our business, we need to make sure that we deliver. Or if for some reason we can't deliver, we need to make sure that we give bad news as early as possible to enable those messages to be onwardly projected to key stakeholders. So there's a massive amount in leadership about reputation. understanding what's at stake, and that's personal reputation and that's business reputation as well. And I think also you have to never, ever stop learning. I'm now Gen X. We have, whole new cohorts coming in fresh from university who have a different perspective and know so much more about things than I did when I was graduating university. I did my degree with a pen and a piece of paper. I think we had, one computer, the first office I ever worked in. So again, to be a good leader in those environments, you need to understand that, and you need to understand what you can learn from those generations to be able to absorb into your business. Because invariably, those people are the future of business. And at some point, those people who have been your team, your mentees, etc., they become the leaders of your clients. And if you don't have the EQ to understand that they are the future, and that light bulb go on, and you understand, well, I have to follow that, and I need to understand in my business a way to deliver news that's not always taken well. We're behind the curve. We're potentially behind our competition. This is what's coming. Are we going to evolve? And there's bravery in leadership as well, because just because you're a leader, it doesn't mean people always think you're right. And you have to be quite robust and be able to take the setbacks and the knockbacks and kind of steel yourself to keep going. And you have to be able to create calm in the people that work for you when maybe things are going wrong. Maybe there are redundancies, maybe a job's going wrong. So it's not about having a poker face. I think it's about being human, but being that person that teams can rely on and that the business can rely on is very important to staying in those leadership positions. Not in the face of adversity, kind of throwing your hands up and saying, well, this is too difficult, because your role is to find a path to make it easier for the people that work for you, and to provide, it's a cliche, but solutions, not problems, I think.
It's a cliche, but it's still valid.
But it's true.
Thank you, Ceri. It's been so interesting talking to you. Thank you on my behalf and on behalf of my classmates, Stanford LEAD program. Have a great day.
It's my pleasure. You too.